Everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use layer mask in Photoshop. Now your layer mask button is actually at the very bottom of your layers panel. So here's my layers panel, and this is your layer mask button, rectangle with a circle inside. Now what does a layer mask do? A layer mask allows you to remove parts of an image and even add parts back that maybe you don't want, but you don't want to permanently delete. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to use a layer mask, and one way is to actually select your subject. So let's say, like for instance, in this image, I really want to remove the background. I want to keep my subject. So the way that the layer mask is going to work is that if I make a selection of my subject, the layer mask will keep what I've selected and remove anything that's not selected. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a selection for this one. Now, if you're not familiar with the selection tools in Photoshop, go watch the tutorial on how to use selection tools. But they're located near the top of the toolbar. You have your marquee tools, your lasso tools, and other selection tools here. You also have select and a couple different options up here. And notice specifically there's one for subjects. This one works really well. This one a good selection of my subject. Now, if it's not perfect, we can go back with other selection tools and refine it. We can add to it or subtract from it if needed. But Photoshop usually does a pretty good All right, yes, notice what a great selection it made. Now the only thing I'm seeing, which is very small, is part of the ear that wasn't selected. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that. And I'm going to grab a different selection tool. Maybe I'll just grab the loop tool. I want to make sure I'm in my options, I'm adding to the selection. And I'm just going to basically circle that area and add that part of the ear back in. Now Photoshop had a hard time determining the color of the ear versus the color of the background, which is understandable. Okay, otherwise, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out so we can see what we're doing. Now again, layer mask will keep what's selected and remove the background. So if I go find my layer mask button and click on it, notice it did two different things in Photoshop. One is that now we have this checkered background. Anytime you see a checkered background, it means that it is transparent and there's actually no background to this image anymore. It's been removed. If you look at the actual layers panel, you'll see that you've still got your icon here of the original image, but this new little box has been added in. This is your layer mask, but notice it's in black and white. The way that the mask works is that anything that is still visible is in white. Anything that's been removed is in black. So you can actually further adjust this mask with a brush, and I'll show you that here. So if we grab our brush tool on the toolbar, now this isn't necessary because it already gave me a great selection, but I'll just show you how this works anyway. Really quickly, down here at the bottom, you've got your foreground color, which is the box on top, your background color, which is the box in the back. Any color you're using is the one that's in the front, and you can actually toggle between the two with this arrow. The little tiny version of the black and white will actually reset those default colors because black and white is really useful in Photoshop, specifically with layer masks. So like this layer mask shows, white is what's visible, black is not visible. So if I used white and painted on my photo, it's going to bring back the parts of the photo that I've already removed. So again, layer masks will keep your image and not delete any of that information, so you can always bring it back at any time. If I switch to black, black will remove any part of the image that I paint. So this can help you to like refine a selection. If you already made a mask and you need to go back and fix something, add something back in, or remove something, this is really good for that. You can also use it to like just remove parts of an image. So if I wanted like the top of his head to be open, I could do that. Now keep in mind, because you're using the brush tool, you have options at the top to adjust your brush. You can adjust the size here in the drop down as well as the hardness of the brush. If this is at 100%, you're going to get a really precise edge. Notice how clean that line is. Whereas if you lower this down to 0, you're going to get a really soft edge, and anything in between will be something in between. You also have other options here that we're not going to go over, but one like opacity will only remove part of the image and not the full thing, depending on how much you have. 100% will remove or add back the whole thing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and undo a couple of those things and add my layer mask back in. All right, now let's do this with another object just so you can see how this could work maybe a little bit differently. Now, with this particular image, I could use a bunch of different selection tools. I could go back to select and subject, or because this already has a really clear white background, I could use my magic wand selection tool because it grabs color and literally click right in the white. Okay, now if I were to make a mask of this, notice that it's removing the scissors because instead of having the scissors selected, I actually have the background selected. So what I could do here is I could actually go to the top and select inverse or shift control I. And what that's going to do is it's going to switch my selection. So whatever I had selected before is now unselected and vice versa. And now if I make my layer mask, it looks like this. But notice that I'm missing part of the handles. You have a couple options here if that ever happens to you. You can undo and adjust your selection, which is what I usually suggest to do. So I could continue to use the magic wand, but go to subtract and just click inside the handles. And then when I make the mask, it looks fantastic. The other option here, if I didn't go back and make a selection, I could make adjustments just using my brush tool. So making sure that you have the mask selected when using your brush tool is really important. If you have the icon selected, it's going to paint over that, which is not what we want. So mask selected, and then you could, with black, remove. Now this is not going to be as precise as making a selection, but that is always an option. You could also, instead of just straight up painting it, we could, let's go ahead and make the mask again. Let's say something was saved like this and you couldn't undo and redo the selection. What you could do is you could select these areas again. Now I can't add another mask because remember right now a selection will keep what's selected and I don't want to keep what's selected. Even if I were to inverse the selection and add a new layer mask, nothing will happen on the image. A new mask was added to my layer, but Photoshop doesn't understand more than one layer mask. So I'm actually going to right click and delete that, undo that inverse that I just did. And instead, I'm just going to adjust the layer mask that already exists. So instead of just painting on it, which wasn't very precise, I made a selection first, and now we can use the brush tool with black to easily remove that part. Because the selection is going, I don't have to be precise in my painting. All I have to do now is deselect. And that's how you use a layer mask.